In a small, quiet town nestled in the southern United States, Lieutenant Sarah Collins was someone who stood out. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a trailblazer, a decorated military officer with years of service under her belt. Her uniform wasn't just fabric stitched together, it was a symbol of discipline, sacrifice, and hope. For many people in her community, Sarah represented progress, a living testament to how far things had come since the days when opportunities were denied based on the color of one's skin. But Sarah's journey hadn't been easy. Growing up, she often found herself caught between two worlds. On one side, there was her family, her parents, both passionate civil rights activists who taught her about resilience and standing up for what is right. They shared stories of their own struggles during the civil rights movement, painting vivid pictures of marches, protests, and fights for equality. These stories weren't just bedtime tales for young Sarah. They shaped her understanding of the world and planted seeds of determination deep within her heart. On the other side, there was the reality of her surroundings. The town she grew up in wasn't exactly known for its inclusivity or forward-thinking mindset. Racism still lingered like an unwelcome shadow, casting doubt over whether someone like Sarah could ever truly belong. Despite this, she never let negativity define her. Instead, she channeled her energy into proving doubters wrong. From excelling in school to joining local leadership programs, Sarah made sure her presence was felt, not through loud declarations but through consistent action and hard work. Her decision to join the military came naturally. It wasn't just about escaping the confines of her hometown or seeking adventure. It was about serving something bigger than herself. The military offered structure, purpose, and a chance to make a real difference. And that's exactly what Sarah did. Over the years, she climbed the ranks, earning respect from colleagues and superiors alike. Her dedication earned her accolades, including medals for bravery and excellence in leadership. But more importantly, it gave her a platform, a voice that couldn't be ignored. Now, in her mid-30s, Sarah carried herself with quiet confidence. She had learned early on that true strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from staying steady even when the winds blow hardest. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, and her calm demeanor masked a fierce determination beneath the surface. People often underestimated her at first glance, mistaking her reserved nature for weakness. Those who did quickly realized their mistake when they saw her step up in moments of crisis, leading with clarity and compassion. This time, however, Sarah wasn't wearing her uniform. She was on leave from active duty, back home to spend some much-needed time with her family. Life in the military kept her away for long stretches, and she cherished these rare opportunities to reconnect with loved ones. Her mother had cooked her favorite meals, and her father had dug out old photo albums filled with memories of her childhood. Sitting around the dining table, laughing and reminiscing, felt like medicine for her soul after months of grueling deployments. On this particular evening, Sarah decided to take a walk. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. Streetlights cast soft golden glows onto sidewalks lined with quaint shops and cozy cafes. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaotic environments she often navigated during her missions. As she strolled along, she reflected on how far she'd come. Her hometown hadn't changed much physically, but she certainly had. She no longer felt weighed down by the doubts and fears that once plagued her here. Now she walked tall, head held high, proud of who she was and what she represented. Despite her success, Sarah remained humble. She understood that her achievements weren't solely hers. They belonged to everyone who had supported her along the way. Her parents' sacrifices, her mentors' guidance, and even the challenges she faced all played a role in shaping her into the person she had become. This sense of gratitude grounded her, reminding her that no matter how far she traveled or how high she rose, she would always be connected to her roots. As she approached the edge of downtown, nearing a park where children laughed and played under twinkling fairy lights, Sarah paused for a moment. She glanced at her reflection in a storefront window, catching sight of the military ID badge hanging loosely around her neck. It was habit more than necessity, something she did without thinking, a reminder of her identity and responsibility. Little did she know, This simple accessory would soon thrust her into a situation that would test every ounce of strength and courage she possessed. Though the night seemed tranquil, an unsettling encounter loomed ahead. Yet, Sarah remained blissfully unaware, savoring the calm before the storm. Her thoughts drifted back to happier memories, and she smiled softly, grateful for the momentary peace. What lay ahead was unpredictable, but if there was one thing Sarah had learned throughout her life, it was this: storms may rage, but they cannot extinguish the light of those who refuse to dim their shine. As Sarah continued her leisurely walk, the atmosphere around her remained serene. The park ahead buzzed with life, children chasing each other on the grass, couples sitting on benches sharing quiet conversations, and elderly folks walking their dogs. It was the kind of evening that made people feel grateful for simple pleasures. For Sarah, it was a rare moment of calm after months of high-stress situations in the military. She took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill her lungs, savoring the peacefulness. But just as she reached the edge of the park, the tranquility was abruptly shattered. A police car rolled up slowly beside her, its tires crunching against the gravel. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off nearby buildings, casting an eerie glow onto the street. Two officers stepped out of the vehicle, their expressions stern and uninviting. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his stance radiating authority. The other was shorter but equally imposing, his eyes scanning Sarah with suspicion. They introduced themselves as Officer Greg Monroe and Officer Carl Rivers, though their tone lacked any semblance of courtesy. Sarah immediately noticed the tension in their body language. Their presence felt intrusive, almost predatory, as if they were sizing her up before making a judgment. She instinctively straightened her posture, maintaining composure despite the sudden intrusion. Her military training kicked in, reminding her to stay calm and observant. Still, something about the way they looked at her set off alarm bells in her mind. Their gazes lingered too long on her skin tone, their lips curling slightly into sneers that betrayed more than mere professional curiosity. "Ma'am," Monroe began, his voice sharp and commanding, "can you explain what you're doing here?" The question caught Sarah off guard. What she was doing, walking, a perfectly ordinary activity that countless others were enjoying without interference. Yet here she was, being singled out under the harsh glare of police headlights. She glanced around, noticing that no one else in the vicinity seemed to be receiving similar attention. Families played on, couples whispered sweet nothings, and joggers passed by unnoticed. Why then had these officers chosen to focus solely on her? "I'm just taking a walk," Sarah replied evenly, keeping her tone polite but firm. "Is there a problem?" Monroe exchanged a glance with Rivers, who smirked faintly before stepping closer. "A walk?" he echoed mockingly. "At this hour? In this neighborhood?" His words dripped with skepticism, as if implying she didn't belong there. Sarah felt a flicker of irritation but pushed it aside. She reminded herself not to let emotions cloud her judgment. Instead, she decided to diffuse the situation by cooperating fully. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out her military ID badge, the very same one she'd been wearing around her neck, and held it up for them to see. "Here's my identification," she said calmly. "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Collins, currently on leave from active duty." For a brief moment, there was silence. The officers studied the badge, their expressions unreadable. Then Monroe snatched it from her hand, turning it over as if inspecting it for forgery. His lips curled further into a sneer. "Lieutenant, huh?" he muttered sarcastically. "You sure don't look like no lieutenant to me." The comment stung, though Sarah tried not to show it. She knew all too well the sting of prejudice disguised as skepticism, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Instead, she maintained her composure, speaking with measured calm. "If you have questions about my credentials, I'd be happy to clarify. My service record is public information." Rivers chimed in now, his tone dripping with disdain. "Oh, we've got plenty of questions," he said, stepping even closer until he was nearly towering over her. "Like why someone like you is wandering around here acting all entitled." His choice of words struck a nerve. Someone like you. The phrase hung heavy in the air, loaded with implications Sarah understood all too well. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered such thinly veiled racism, nor would it likely be the last. But hearing it now in this context felt particularly jarring. Here she was, a decorated officer who had risked her life for her country, being treated like a suspect simply because of the color of her skin. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Passers-by slowed down, curious about the commotion. Some recognized Sarah from earlier walks through the area. Others were drawn by the unmistakable tension between her and the officers. Whispers rippled through the group as people exchanged uneasy glances. A few pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Sarah could feel the weight of the growing audience pressing in on her. Part of her wanted to address them directly, to explain how absurd this entire situation was. But she resisted the urge, knowing that escalating the confrontation wouldn't help matters. Instead, she focused on the officers, determined to handle the situation with dignity. "Officers," she said, her voice steady despite the rising frustration bubbling inside her. "I assure you I haven't done anything wrong. I'm simply enjoying an evening walk. If you have legitimate concerns, I'm happy to cooperate, but I expect to be treated with respect." Her words seemed to have the opposite effect. Rather than calming the situation, they appeared to infuriate Monroe. Even more, he leaned in, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and rancid. "Respect?" he spat. "You want respect? Maybe you should earn it instead of parading around like you own the place." The remark hit hard, but Sarah forced herself to remain composed. She locked eyes with him, refusing to back down. "I've earned my respect through years of service," she countered, her voice firm yet controlled. "And I deserve to be treated accordingly." For a split second, it seemed as though Monroe might relent. His jaw tightened and his gaze flickered uncertainly. But then Rivers interjected, his tone laced with mockery. "Yeah, okay, Lieutenant," he drawled, rolling his eyes. "Let's see how tough you are when we haul your ass downtown." The threat hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Sarah realized that this wasn't just about verifying her identity or questioning her presence. It was about power. These men weren't interested in justice or fairness. They were flexing their authority, using intimidation to assert dominance. And unfortunately, Sarah wasn't the first person of color to find herself on the receiving end of such treatment. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah stood her ground. She clasped her hands behind her back, mimicking the posture she often adopted during military inspections. Her stance conveyed confidence, even as her heart pounded in her chest. She knew that reacting emotionally would only play into their hands, so she waited, silently challenging them to justify their hostility. Meanwhile, the crowd continued to grow. Murmurs of disapproval spread among the onlookers, some of whom began recording the encounter on their phones. One woman called out, "What's going on here? She hasn't done anything." Another man added, "Leave her alone, she's a veteran." Their voices emboldened Sarah, reminding her that she wasn't entirely alone. Still, she couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this situation was far from over. The officers' expressions grew darker, their patience wearing thin. Whatever happened next, Sarah braced herself for the worst, determined to face it with courage and grace. Little did she know the true test of her resilience was still to come. The tension between Sarah and the two officers was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The crowd continued to grow, their murmurs growing louder as they watched the unfolding scene. Some people stood frozen in disbelief, while others whispered angrily among themselves, shaking their heads at the blatant disrespect being displayed. Despite the mounting pressure from the onlookers, Monroe and Rivers seemed unfazed, even emboldened by the attention. For them, this wasn't just about questioning Sarah. It had become a performance, a display of authority meant to assert dominance over someone they saw as inferior. Monroe stepped closer to Sarah, his face twisted into a sneer. He waved her military ID badge in front of her face like it was some kind of counterfeit card, rather than a legitimate document proving her rank and service. You really think this piece of paper makes you special? He asked mockingly, his tone dripping with condescension. You're not fooling anyone here. Sarah clenched her fists behind her back, her nails digging into her palms to keep herself composed. She could feel her pulse racing, but she refused to let her emotions show. Years of military training had taught her how to remain calm under pressure, and now more than ever, she needed to draw on that discipline. Taking a deep breath, she responded steadily. This piece of paper, as you call it, represents years of sacrifice, dedication, and service to my country. If you have doubts about its authenticity, I suggest you verify it through official channels. Her response only seemed to infuriate Monroe further. His nostrils flared, and his eyes narrowed as if daring her to challenge him again. Beside him, Rivers chuckled darkly, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Oh, look at her, he jeered, leaning casually against the hood of the patrol car. Miss High and Mighty thinks she can lecture us now. Maybe we should teach her a lesson about respect. The word respect rolled off Rivers' tongue like venom, twisting its meaning into something ugly and hollow. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, though she kept her expression neutral. She knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to provoke her, hoping she'd lose her temper so they could justify whatever punishment they had in mind. But Sarah wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, she squared her shoulders and met their gazes head-on. Respect is earned, she said firmly, her voice carrying just enough authority to make both men pause for a moment. And I've earned mine through actions, not words. If you have a legitimate reason for detaining me, then do your job. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you'd stop wasting my time. Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. For a brief second, it seemed like Monroe might actually consider backing down. His grip on her ID badge loosened slightly, and his posture shifted as if uncertainty flickered across his mind. But then Rivers chimed in again, his voice cutting through. The tension like a knife. Wasting your time? Rivers repeated, his tone laced with mockery. Oh, sweetheart, you haven't seen wasted time yet. He pushed off the car and took a step toward her, his movements deliberate and menacing. How about we take a little ride downtown? Let's see how tough you are when you're sitting in a cell. The threat sent a ripple of outrage through the crowd. Gasps echoed around them, followed by muttered protests. Someone shouted, She hasn't done anything wrong. Another voice added, This is ridiculous. She's a veteran. The growing chorus of disapproval seemed to irritate the officers even more. Monroe scowled at the bystanders, raising a hand as if to silence them. Stay out of this unless you want trouble too, Monroe barked, his voice booming over the murmurs. The warning silenced most of the crowd, though a few brave individuals continued filming the incident on their phones. One young man held his device steady, capturing every word and gesture, his hands trembling slightly with a mix of fear and determination. Sarah glanced at the crowd briefly, her heart swelling with gratitude for their support. It was a small comfort, knowing that witnesses were documenting the encounter, but it also reminded her of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up against injustice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin or the uniform they wore. Turning her attention back to the officers, Sarah decided to push forward with logic and reason. If you intend to detain me, I'd like to know the charges, she said calmly, enunciating each word carefully. Otherwise, I assume I'm free to go. Her question caught Monroe off guard, forcing him to hesitate. Detaining someone without probable cause was a violation of protocol, and he knew it. But admitting that aloud would mean losing control of the situation, something neither officer was willing to do. Instead, Monroe turned to Rivers, exchanging a quick glance that spoke volumes. Whatever silent agreement passed between them sealed Sarah's fate. Rivers smirked, his lips curling into a cruel smile. You want to play games, Lieutenant? He taunted, emphasizing her title sarcastically. Fine, we'll play. With that, he reached into the patrol car and grabbed a bottle of water sitting in the cup holder. At first, Sarah didn't understand what he was doing. Her brow furrowed in confusion as Rivers unscrewed the cap and approached her with slow, deliberate steps. Before she could react, Rivers tipped the bottle over her head, drenching her in cold water. The liquid splashed onto her hair, soaking her clothes and dripping down her face. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd, followed by shouts of disbelief and anger. Sarah froze, stunned by the sheer audacity of the act. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she could do was stand there, water dripping from her chin as Rivers laughed cruelly. "Oh, come on," he sneered, tossing the empty bottle back into the car. "Don't tell me you're gonna cry now. You wanted respect, right? Well, that's what you deserve." The humiliation burned worse than any insult they had thrown at her. Every drop of water felt like a weight pressing down on her dignity, threatening to crush her spirit. But Sarah refused to let them see her break. Slowly she raised her head, meeting their smug grins with steely resolve. Her hands remained steady at her sides, her body rigid with self-control. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Monroe joined in the laughter, clapping Rivers on the shoulder as if congratulating him for a job well done. "Yeah, that ought to cool her off," he said, chuckling darkly. "Maybe next time she'll think twice before walking around places she doesn't belong." The words stung, but Sarah forced herself to focus on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her. It was about exposing the ugliness of racism and abuse of power. As much as it hurt, she knew that staying strong in this moment mattered more than anything else. So she stood tall, letting the water soak into her clothes, silently vowing to fight back, not with violence or hatred, but with truth and resilience. The crowd, now fully enraged, began shouting louder, their voices blending into a cacophony of protest. Phones continued recording, capturing every second of the horrifying ordeal. Some people stepped forward, demanding the officers explain themselves, while others called for backup, dialing local news stations and civil rights organizations. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Monroe and Rivers finally realized they had gone too far, but it was too late to turn back now. The damage was done and the world was watching. The moment the cold water hit Sarah's head, time seemed to freeze. The laughter of Monroe and Rivers echoed cruelly in the night air, but it was drowned out by the collective gasp from the crowd. For a few seconds, everything felt surreal, like a scene pulled straight out of a nightmare. Water dripped steadily from Sarah's hair, running down her face and soaking into her clothes. Her hands remained clenched at her sides, trembling not from fear, but from the sheer force of her willpower to stay composed. Rivers tossed the empty bottle back into the patrol car with a smirk, his posture relaxed as if he'd just performed some trivial prank. "There you go," he said mockingly, leaning closer to her. "A little shower never hurt anyone. Maybe now you'll remember your place." His tone was venomous, laced with contempt that went beyond mere disdain. It was hatred disguised as authority. Monroe joined in, chuckling darkly as he crossed his arms over his chest. "Yeah, maybe next time you won't come strutting around here like you own the damn town," he added, his words sharp and cutting. Both men stood there, smug and unapologetic, as though they had proven something by humiliating her. To them, this act wasn't just about asserting power. It was about stripping away Sarah's dignity, reducing her to nothing more than an object of ridicule. But Sarah refused to let them win. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't beg for mercy. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, meeting their sneers with a gaze so steady it made them falter for a split second. Her silence spoke louder than any words could have. It wasn't defeat, it was defiance. Every drop of water clinging to her skin felt like fuel igniting a fire within her, strengthening her resolve to stand tall no matter what. The crowd, however, couldn't contain their outrage. What started as murmurs of disapproval quickly escalated into shouts of anger and disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" one woman yelled, pushing her way to the front of the gathering. "She hasn't done anything wrong. You can't treat people like this." Another man stepped forward, holding his phone up high to record the incident. "This is disgusting. Do you even realize who she is? She's a veteran, a hero." Their voices grew louder, blending into a chorus of protests that reverberated through the streets. Some people began clapping rhythmically, creating a haunting beat that underscored the tension in the air. Others raised their fists in solidarity, shouting slogans like, "No justice, no peace," and "Respect our heroes." The officers' earlier confidence began to waver under the weight of public scrutiny. They glanced nervously at each other, realizing too late that their actions had crossed a line. Sarah, still standing silently amidst the chaos, felt a surge of gratitude toward the crowd. Their support buoyed her spirits, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. But she also knew that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the ugly truth of systemic racism and abuse of power. Every person watching, recording or shouting in her defense was part of something bigger than themselves. This moment would ripple outward, demanding accountability and change. As the commotion intensified, Monroe tried to regain control of the situation. He raised his voice, barking orders at the crowd. "Back off, this doesn't concern any of you." But his command only fueled their anger further. Someone shouted back, "It concerns all of us when officers abuse their power." Another voice chimed in, "You're supposed to protect us, not humiliate us." Rivers, visibly agitated, took a step toward the crowd, pointing a finger threateningly. "Keep your distance or we'll arrest every single one of you," he snapped, his bravado masking the unease creeping into his expression. But the threat fell flat. No one budged. If anything, the crowd pressed closer, their phones capturing every detail of the confrontation. Each recording was a weapon, a piece of evidence that could hold these officers accountable for their actions. Meanwhile, Sarah remained the calm eye of the storm. She wiped the water from her eyes with the back of her hand, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Her military training kicked in again, reminding her to focus on the facts rather than emotions. She knew that losing her temper or retaliating physically would only give Monroe and Rivers ammunition to justify their behavior. So instead, she chose to channel her energy into something more powerful: resilience. "You've made your point," she said finally, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Though soft, it carried an undeniable strength that silenced the crowd momentarily. All eyes turned to her, waiting to see what she would say next. Even Monroe and Rivers paused, caught off guard by her composure. "But know this," she continued, her gaze locking onto theirs. "What you've done tonight doesn't define me. It defines you. And the world is watching." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of her conviction. They had expected tears, protests, maybe even resistance, but not this quiet, unwavering defiance. It unnerved them, forcing them to confront the reality of what they had done. For the first time, they looked unsure, glancing nervously at the growing number of cameras pointed in their direction. The crowd erupted in applause, cheering Sarah on as she stood soaked and dignified. Strangers approached her, offering jackets and towels to help dry off. One elderly woman placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for standing strong," she whispered. "We're with you." Despite the overwhelming support, Sarah couldn't shake the sting of humiliation. Every glance at Monroe and Rivers reminded her of the injustice she had endured. Yet, she also recognized the opportunity before her. This wasn't just a personal attack. It was a chance to shine a light on the systemic issues plaguing law, enforcement, and society as a whole. By staying composed and refusing to be broken, she had turned a moment of cruelty into a catalyst for change. As the officers retreated to their patrol car, muttering threats under their breath, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She didn't feel victorious, not yet, but she felt hope. Hope that this incident would spark conversations, inspire action, and lead to meaningful reform. Hope that others witnessing her story would find the courage to speak out against injustice in their own lives. And most importantly, hope that no one else would have to endure what she had tonight. The crowd lingered for a while longer, unwilling to disperse until the officers drove away. As the red and blue lights faded into the distance, the park returned to its earlier tranquility. Children resumed playing, couples strolled hand in hand, and life moved forward. But for Sarah, and for everyone who had witnessed the events of that evening, nothing would ever be the same again. By the time the patrol car disappeared into the night, the crowd had transformed from a group of bystanders into a collective force demanding justice. Phones were still raised high, capturing footage and live-streaming the aftermath of the incident. Social media platforms buzzed with activity as videos of Sarah's ordeal spread like wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags such as Justice for Sarah, Respect Our Heroes, and End Police Brutality began trending across the country. The story wasn't just local news anymore, it was national. People who watched the clips online felt a mix of shock, anger, and admiration. Many couldn't believe what they were seeing. A decorated military officer humiliated in broad daylight, or rather under the harsh glare of police lights, by two men sworn to protect and serve. Comments flooded in, expressing outrage at the officer's behavior while praising Sarah's composure. "She didn't deserve this," one user wrote. "Her silence speaks louder than their cruelty." Another added, "This is why we need reform. Racism has no place in law enforcement." The viral nature of the incident brought attention not only to Sarah, but also to the broader issue of systemic racism within policing. Journalists scrambled to piece together details, reaching out to witnesses, community leaders, and even Sarah herself for interviews. Local news outlets aired segments featuring footage of the confrontation, alongside commentary from experts on civil rights and criminal justice reform. National networks picked up the story, airing it during primetime broadcasts and sparking debates among viewers about accountability and equality. Back in her hometown, Sarah found herself at the center of an unexpected storm. Though she had always been respected locally, she now became a symbol, a face of resilience and courage in the fight against injustice. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike reached out to offer support. Some dropped off flowers at her parents' house. Others left heartfelt notes thanking her for standing strong. Even people who had never met her personally rallied behind her cause, organizing protests and vigils to demand accountability for Monroe and Rivers. One of the most powerful responses came from veterans organizations. Across the country, groups representing service members past and present issued statements condemning the officer's actions and calling for immediate consequences. "Lieutenant Collins represents everything honorable about our armed forces," read one statement from a prominent veterans association. "To treat her with such disrespect is not only an insult to her but to every individual who has served this nation." Civil rights activists joined the chorus, framing the incident as yet another example of racial profiling and abuse of power. Leaders from organizations like the NAACP and Black Lives Matter held press conferences, urging authorities to investigate thoroughly and transparently. They emphasized that Sarah's case was emblematic of larger systemic issues affecting communities of color nationwide. "This isn't isolated," one activist declared passionately during a televised interview. "It's a pattern that must end." Amidst the growing outcry, Sarah remained remarkably composed. She understood that her voice carried weight in this moment, and she chose to use it wisely. In interviews conducted shortly after the incident, she spoke calmly and thoughtfully, avoiding inflammatory language or calls for vengeance. Instead, she focused on solutions, advocating for reforms that could prevent similar situations in the future. "When I joined the military, I did so because I wanted to make a difference," Sarah explained in one interview, her tone measured but firm. "I believed in serving something greater than myself. What happened to me last night wasn't just about me. It was about exposing the cracks in a system that needs fixing. We can't ignore those cracks anymore." Her words resonated deeply with audiences, earning widespread praise for their wisdom and restraint. Viewers saw in Sarah not just a victim of injustice, but a leader capable of guiding meaningful change. Her ability to rise above hatred and channel her pain into purpose inspired countless others to reflect on their own roles in combating prejudice and inequality. Local officials, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure to respond. The mayor of Sarah's town released a statement promising a full investigation into the officer's conduct. "We are committed to ensuring transparency and accountability," he said, though his words were met with skepticism by many who doubted whether real action would follow. Community meetings were scheduled to address public concerns, drawing large crowds eager to voice their frustrations and demands. Even federal authorities took notice. The Department of Defense issued a formal condemnation of the incident, emphasizing that attacks on service members were unacceptable under any circumstances. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle called for hearings to examine the broader implications of the case, using it as a springboard to discuss long overdue reforms in law enforcement practices. As the days passed, momentum continued to build. Protests erupted in cities across the country, with demonstrators holding signs bearing Sarah's name and images from the viral video. Chants of "pouring water on dignity won't wash away injustice" echoed through streets lined with banners and candles. Vigils were held in parks and squares, honoring not only Sarah but all those who had suffered similar indignities at the hands of authority figures. Through it all, Sarah remained grounded, leaning on her family and faith to navigate the whirlwind of attention. While she appreciated the support, she also recognized the responsibility that came with being thrust into the spotlight. Every word she spoke, every decision she made, carried weight, not just for herself, but for everyone counting on her to lead by example. Despite the overwhelming emotions swirling around her, Sarah found solace in small moments of connection. A child handing her a handmade card, a veteran saluting her as she walked down the street, strangers stopping her to share stories of their own struggles with discrimination, hoping to find strength in hers. These interactions reminded her why she had chosen to stay silent during the confrontation, to show that dignity could triumph over cruelty, even in the darkest moments. Yet Sarah knew the fight was far from over. Viral outrage often faded quickly, replaced by the next big headline. If lasting change were to happen, it would require sustained effort. Laws rewritten, policies reformed, hearts and minds changed. And while she couldn't single-handedly dismantle centuries of systemic racism, she could play her part by continuing to speak truth to power and inspiring others to do the same. As she stood on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah reflected on how drastically her life had changed in just a few short days. She had returned home seeking rest and peace, only to find herself thrust into a battle much larger than herself. But instead of feeling defeated, she felt empowered. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of her role, not just as a soldier or a citizen, but as a catalyst for change. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she vowed to face them with the same courage and resilience that had carried her through the darkest night of her life.